Good evening, everyone. Thank you for being here for our webcast, How to Get the Most Out of Your Shelter Medicine Program. I'm Lynn Fridley, Program Manager for Maddie's Institute. Our speakers tonight are Carol Novello and Dr. Cristie Kamiya with the Humane Society Silicon Valley. Carol and Dr. Kamiya have been working together to form an impressive shelter medicine program at HSSV, and they will share their secrets of its success in this webcast. Before we start, let's talk about a few housekeeping items. Please take a look at the left side of your screen where you'll see a Q&A window. That's where you'll ask questions during the presentation. Get those questions in early because we will address them periodically throughout the webcast. If you need help with your connection during the presentation, you can click the Help widget at the bottom of your screen. The green file widget contains the presentation handout and a printable certificate of attendance for people attending this live event. So be sure to download, save, and print. Carol, Dr. Kamiya, thanks for being here with us tonight.
Terrific. Thank you, Lynn. This is Carol, and I'm delighted that we're going to be able to share our experiences with you. And let's go ahead and dive into tonight's agenda. I'm going to start off and talk a little bit about who Humane Society Silicon Valley is and what kind of organization we are. Then Dr. Kamiya is going to talk about the basics of shelter medicine. And then she and I will jointly cover organizational goals and more about shelter medicine. And then Dr. Kamiya will do a more in-depth case study of some things we've gone through here at HSSV, and then I will wrap up with committing to shelter medicine as an organization. So before we actually get into who we are, why don't we actually get a sense of who's on the call, and just so we can try and tailor our comments a little bit as we go. So Lynn, I'm going to turn the poll question over to you.
Okay, so our first question is, what best describes your organization? Private shelter, municipal shelter, rescue group, or other? Please mark in your, right on your screen, not in the Q&A box, just right on your screen. What best describes your organization? And so we're going to go to the results. Oh, we got a pretty even split there amongst the three shelters. Great.
Well, it's helpful to know everyone's background as we launch into talking about HSSV. We are a private shelter, but we actually work extensively with municipal shelters in the area and with other rescue groups in the area. So we will try and highlight how those relationships work as well to make this as relevant as possible for everybody. So first of all, Humane Society Silicon Valley, we actually were founded in 1929, and we started out as an organization that was focused on being a retirement community for horses that worked in the fields, because Silicon Valley used to be an agricultural kind of area. And over time, we've evolved to really reflect what's going on in the community, and now we primarily focus on companion animals, dogs, cats, rabbits, pocket pets. We opened a new Gold LEED certified animal community center back in April of 2009, and it's the first of its concept facility in the country, which really focuses on bringing animals and people together and was specifically designed to be more than a shelter. We also have 3 neighborhood adoption centers that are co-located inside Petco and PetSmart stores. We've found that to be a really important part of our work because it is increasing accessibility and convenience for adoptions. We primarily focus on strays, owner surrender. We do a lot of regional rescue. We go out to municipal shelters in the area and pull animals from those shelters. And we also take in wildlife, although we will usually move that out to rescue organizations very quickly. We are privately funded, so about 75% of our funding comes from the private sector, and that's a little bit different obviously for municipal shelters, but one of the things that we view as our role in the community is to bring incremental capacity to the community in total so that all of the shelters in the area can save more lives because we're bringing more resources to the table. So in total, we've got about 100 employees and over 1,000 volunteers that make it possible for us to do what we do in the community. And an important part of that is really the fact that we work very collaboratively with the other shelters in the community. We formed an alliance that's focused on reducing euthanasia in the community, and we're the single largest privately funded organization in the coalition, and then there are the municipal shelters in the area, which include San Jose Animal Care, Silicon Valley Animal Control Authority, Palo Alto Animal Services, Santa Clara County Animal Services, and then also Town Cats, which is another nonprofit that focuses specifically on cats in the area. So it's through our collaborative efforts that we are able to substantially improve what's going on for the community in total. And we've been through quite a journey. I joined the organization in September of 2010. That was our fiscal year 2010. And at that point, the save rate for HSSV was at 77%. Our intake was about 4,200. And the percentage of animals that needed what we call extended care, which is really kind of any incremental medical or behavioral treatment, 44% of the animals that we took in needed that. Today, in partnering with Dr. Kamiya and really focusing on shelter medicine, we've been able to make some very, very significant increases. Our save rate is now over 90%. We're at 91%. Our intake is up to 5,800 animals, and the percentage of animals that need extended care is now at 76%. So the coalition itself that we're involved with is saving all healthy animals in the community. We've done that, and we'll do that forever going forward. And the animals that are most at risk in the community are those that actually need additional medical or behavioral treatment. And so that's why our investment in shelter medicine is so critical, because we really want to be able to address the populations that are most at risk in the community in total. So with that, I am actually going to pass over to Dr. Cristie Kamiya, and she's going to pick up and start talking about the basics of shelter medicine.
Hello, this is Cristie Kamiya, and before we dive into the basics of shelter medicine, we have another question for you. So take it away, Lynn.
Okay, our second poll question, please answer on your screen. On a scale of 1 to 10, how familiar or knowledgeable are you with shelter medicine? 1 equals no familiarity, and 10 is extremely knowledgeable. So your choices are 1 to 2, 3 to 4, 5 to 6, 7 to 8, or 9 to 10. On a scale of 1 to 10, how familiar are you with shelter medicine? Please answer on your screen. And we'll take a look at the results in just a brief moment. I'll give you all a chance to answer. And so here's the results. Well, that's pretty interesting, Dr. Kamiya.
That is really interesting. So most people have a little bit of knowledge or a little bit more knowledge of what shelter medicine is. So that's fantastic. So the question is, what is shelter medicine? So shelter medicine is a relatively new field of veterinary medicine. It's been around about a smidge more than a decade or so. It is now an actual boarded specialty in veterinary medicine, similar to how cardiology or ophthalmology or oncology is a boarded specialty. Shelter medicine is now a boarded specialty through the American Board of Veterinary Practitioners, and that's a new thing that just occurred in the past year or so, and the first group of specialists just took their exams about a month ago. So but what does this mean? What is shelter medicine? Shelter medicine is the field of veterinary medicine that's dedicated solely to the care of homeless animals in shelters or in shelters or other facilities that's meant to find them new homes. We're sort of in the middle of a paradigm shift in the way that we think about animal sheltering. In the past, it was all about rabies control, public health, and it was holding animals for a very short time with a very large volume. But things have changed and shifted over the past few decades, where now we're holding animals longer, we're providing higher standards of care, we're rehoming them versus euthanizing them, and shelter medicine evolved as a field to address a lot of the needs that have come about with these changes, with these paradigm shifts. The needs are different for animals staying in a shelter for 2-3 weeks or sometimes even longer versus an animal being kept in a stainless steel box for 2 or 3 days. And so some of the differences between shelter medicine and private practitioners, in private practice, for the most part, you're dealing with own patients and you're focused on individualized care. A sick animal comes in, you fix that one animal. In the shelter medicine world, we do perform individualized care. However, there are other considerations that you need to take note of when you are providing individualized care. You need to balance the individualized care with the population of the entire shelter within the confines of the resource availability of the shelter. Most of the animals that come through our doors are unowned, so they don't come with a history. They might be strays, they might be owner surrenders, they may be part of a cruelty investigation, so you don't have the advantage of having their entire life history coming into the shelter. So that comes with a lot more risk. There's risks of infectious disease with animals with unknown histories, and so there's a lot of focus on the population health, the population care, and also infectious disease control, a lot of preventive medicine. When a sick cat comes in to a private practice, it's pretty straightforward. You put them on some antibiotics and you send them on their way. When a sick animal comes into your shelter, you need to think about the rest of the population. What do I do to treat this animal and prevent the disease from spreading to the rest of the population? So these are a little bit of the differences. I mean, it's a totally different skill set. Also included in that is organizational policy development, animal behavior, because it's not just about the physical health of the animal living in the shelter or staying in the shelter, and also facility design and how that plays into the health and the overall well-being of the animal. So the other question then is, why do we need shelter medicine specialists? Why do we need the veterinarians with additional training, additional experience and skill set in this field? So what happens with this specialty, you have the veterinarians, and we're have the ability to create a pool of experts. So these are your specialty practitioners, your educators who will be training the next generation of shelter medicine practitioners, and you need the researchers, and there's always a need for consultants to come in and help shelters increase their standard of care. The ultimate goal of shelter medicine or animal sheltering, shelter medicine specifically, is to elevate the level of care and promote a higher quality of life for shelter animals. I remember about 10 years ago working in the trenches and thinking, as I was treating a bunch of URI cats in the URI isolation ward, I'm thinking, what can we do? What are we doing? And how can we do things better? Here we are treating and spending thousands of dollars treating URI for these cats. These cats come in healthy, they get sick in the shelter, and they spend weeks being treated. It costs a lot of money. It takes up a lot of time and a lot of resources. There's got to be a better way. But when you're in the trenches working, there's not a lot of time to think about these questions or to pursue these questions. And part of the reason for pursuing residency is that being part of research, you're able to ask these questions, and if there aren't any answers for it, you can go looking for the questions, or you're looking for the answers to these questions. And on top of that, you're able to, once you find the questions, you're able to disseminate the information to the rest of the shelter medicine world, and that's how we promote this higher level of care for the animals in sheltering. Additionally, the Guidelines for Standards of Care in Animal Shelters is a publication that was put forth by the Association of Shelter Veterinarians back in 2010. And these guidelines are available for download on the Association of Shelter Veterinarians website. That's sheltervet.org. We'll have a list of resources at the end of the talk. But what this is a first attempt to provide some basic guidelines for the minimum standards of care for animal shelters or any type of facility holding animals long-term for eventual rehoming. And the reason for this is there aren't any federal umbrella organizations overseeing any requirements the way that lab animals or zoos have. And it really varies state to state. Some states require licensing or registration, and other states don't. So there's a lot of inconsistencies, state to state, city to city, on what the appropriate level of care is for shelter animals. And what this does is it provides information of just your baseline care, and these are the guidelines that should be applicable to pretty much any facility. Historically, I'm going to mention this again, that shelters were designed for short-term holding. So we all know about those stainless steel boxes, and those are fine if you're going to be holding animals short-term, like a day or two. But as we are holding animals longer and longer, the changes or the needs of the animals change. And again, it's not just about the physical or medical health of the animal, but we also need to take into consideration the behavioral and emotional needs of the animals the longer we keep them, and we need to make sure that we're providing appropriate enrichment for these animals. And the guidelines address all of these areas. It also addresses things like basic husbandry, sanitation, infectious disease control, behavior, and a lot of other things. And so this document is very highly recommended if you have not had a chance to see the document yet. And so with that, I will turn it back to Carol.
Well,
actually, I think we're going to do some Q&A.
Let me stop in here, Dr. Kamiya. We have several questions that have come from the audience. So I'm going to push this first question to the slide area, and I'll read it out loud. How can veterinarians in shelter medicine make a decent, i.e. competitive salary? I can't afford to take the online shelter medicine courses, and I can't afford to go to the ABVP meeting.
So that's a really good question. You can get pretty creative when it comes to resources. There are a lot of resources available at that's free that you can start off with looking at different websites like the shelter medicine websites, the sheltervet.org, that's the Association of Shelter Medicine website, has a lot of resources for finding resources related to shelter medicine. And as far as a competitive salary, that's a difficult question to answer because it does vary state to state, I think. And I think veterinary medicine in general, there's a lot of variation in the salary range.
Excellent. So here's another question. Are there formal standards of care for foster care?
There are. Foster care is mentioned in the guidelines. I believe no. Foster care is not mentioned in the guidelines, but there is there are no standards. There are no standards for foster care. This document is specifically for shelters, but a lot of the things that are outlined in the shelter standards can transfer over to a foster home. And things specifically like sanitation and infectious disease control, things like that can translate into a foster home.
Okay, great. So here's another question. We've got a lively audience out there, so we might as well answer them. What kind of training do private practitioners need to be able to help shelters? Can they just come in with their existing skills?
Absolutely. Private practitioners can be a tremendous help to the shelters. A lot of this is sort of learn as you go, but the private practitioner skill set can be very valuable to shelters, especially shelters that don't have a shelter veterinarian on board as far as treating individual animals, things like that, and also providing help and support to the shelters. I think a great way for private practitioners to get involved with shelters is to just get involved, give them a call, and volunteer a few days, or see if there's opportunities for contract work or things like that. But absolutely, their existing skill set is very, very helpful.
Thank you. In the standard of care manual, are there mental health concerns for the pets addressed, or just physical?
The mental and emotional behavioral concerns are definitely addressed in the standards.
Thank you. Here's another one. Does your group have standards of care for your foster groups? Well, I think we just answered that one. Let me go on to the next.
Okay.
Has a veterinary nurse specialty in shelter medicine been considered? I feel if we elevate our nursing care and educate our support staff in a specialty state, we could accomplish so much.
I would love for there to be a veterinary nurse specialty in shelter medicine, but as of now, there is not. It would be great if there was a group out there who would form an organizing committee or look into what that would entail. That would be fantastic. But as far as I know, there is none in the works or planned.
Okay, great. And this is the last question for this segment. What does it take to become a boarded specialist in shelter medicine?
So there are two tracks to becoming a boarded specialist. One is a residency track. There are several veterinary schools in the country that you can do a residency program, and that's usually a 3-year program. And at the end, you take the exam. There's a list of requirements. So that's one route. The other route is the practitioner route, where as a practicing shelter veterinarian, you can if you go through their checklist and those requirements, you would become eligible to sit for the board exam. A great resource is the American Board of Veterinary Practitioners website, and that will outline in detail what is needed to become a boarded specialist.
Okay, thank you very much. We have our agenda back up. I guess, Carol, you're up next with organizational goals and shelter medicine?
Yeah. So what I wanted to do was set a bigger picture view of how shelter medicine fits into overarching organizational goals, because one of the things that I think is important, whether you are reporting up to city government or you're reporting into a board of directors or any kind of oversight situation, you want to be able to speak to how shelter medicine is helping the organization fulfill its goals. So before we jump into that, we've got another poll question. So Lynn, I'll pass it over to you.
Okay, here we go. Which of these roles best describes you? Veterinarian, administrative staff, operations staff, volunteer, or other? So we're trying to get a feel of what you all do out there. Are you a veterinarian, administrative staff, operations staff, or volunteer or other? Please answer on your screen, and we'll look at the results in just a second. Give everybody a chance. Which of these roles best describes you? I'd like to encourage people to get their questions in when they can. And Carol, would you mind moving your mic away from your mouth a little bit? It's very, very loud for some people in the audience. So here are the results. Well, we have a lot more veterinarians than any other. So that's great.
Okay, great. Well, I won't dwell too long on the organizational overarching goals, because I think the value will really be hearing Dr. Kamiya talk about the hands-on work. How is this in terms of my voice? Is a little bit better, Lynn?
Very good. Yes, very good, Carol.
Okay.
Thank you.
Great. So one of the things that we did at HSSV was to put a strategic plan in place, which really helped us hone in on what we wanted to accomplish. And I talked about our work in the coalition and in the community, and really understanding the animals that were most at risk in the community, and making sure that we had the capacity to be able to save as many lives as possible. So our commitment to community solutions was one of the things that led us to say, how do we become more efficient to be able to save more lives? And how do we, under organizational strength, make sure that we have the people and the processes in place that will enable us to do that? And we want to be able to do that in a way that's really effective and efficient, and that ties into financial sustainability. And then really the experience that various stakeholders have in our organization is also important. So for our employees, it has been really exciting to be embracing shelter medicine as they've learned new things and have had their skill sets expanded. So shelter medicine really, cuts across a lot of our strategic objectives that we have for our overarching 5-year plan. And then we take our strategic objectives and we tie them into what we call our WAGs, or wildly achievable goals. And those relate back to our strategic priorities. So in our most recent WAGs, we had 3 in particular that were related to shelter medicine that tied back to our strategic priorities. The first one being around assessing the resources and capabilities that we needed in order to optimize length of stay to help the most number of animals. So we wanted to get rid of what we call non-value add length of stay, and Dr. Kamiya will go into that in much more detail. We also wanted to build a high-performance team through continuing to develop the organization and the people in the organization, and then again, really focusing on process and infrastructure to increase effectiveness and efficiency. So those things all roll up into the overarching strategic direction of the organization and focused on what we needed to do on an annual basis, and so that is how shelter medicine fits into the bigger picture, and it's just a way to help explain to other folks who, again, involved in oversight or governance, to see why it's important to embrace shelter medicine to help the organization move forward. So I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Kamiya at this point, who will launch into our initiatives around length of stay.
So this is Cristie Kamiya again. So one of the cool things about making the length of stay part of our organizational goals was LOS became a buzzword in the organization. What is LOS? Is it Los Gatos, Los Altos, et cetera, et cetera? But LOS, that's length of stay. And length of stay specifically is the amount of time from the moment an animal enters the shelter until the moment the animal exits. And what does that look like? It's so at intake, from intake and all of the processes that go on in the shelter and out to the adoption floor, then into their new home. And ideally, we want this to be a straight shot. We want this to be, pretty straightforward. You come in, you do your thing, you get adopted. But as we know, they tend to look more like this. more like, they'll come in, some animals are ill, some animals need surgery, they wait around, things are bottlenecked in medico, and so they're waiting for a space on the adoption floor, and so there's a lot of time that can be bottlenecked when we look at length of stay. And the reason we're bringing up length of stay is because this is a very important component to a lot of the work that we've been able to do, and having a good understanding of what the length of stay is for your animals in your shelter. And the approach that we took was looking for bottlenecks, looking for the areas where animals just sit around or their time spent not doing any productive activities. So our goal is to assess the length of stay of an animal and eliminate all of the non-productive time that an animal is sitting. So a non-productive time just means that there's no function happening, there's no process happening. The animal comes in, they're waiting to be changed to a status, they're waiting for a vaccine, and looking at it in these little chunks, we are able to address those specifically and chip away at these extra length of stay so that we do eventually get this straight line. Now, the way that we worded it as optimizing length of stay, we acknowledge that not every animal that comes in will be straightforward. And it doesn't mean that we're going to be increasing euthanasia or that there's a time limit on any animal that comes into our doors. What the optimizing length of stay means is that for the animals that need treatment, they're going to get treatment. For the animals that need extra time so that the behavior team can work with them, they're going to get that. And so they're going to get everything that they need, but we're still going to look at how we can trim down that length of stay to make sure that every minute that the animal is in our care, there's something happening. And so that we don't have to create extra work or use up extra resources. And why does that matter? Because really, if we are able to decrease our length of stay, we can save more lives. And it might seem a little counterintuitive to some folks, and it's been a difficult concept to wrap your head around for some staff. But this really works. You decrease your length of stay, you can save more lives. So we're going to go into some case studies. Hold on just a second. I lost one of my slides. So putting it all together, one of the nice things of having a shelter medicine specialty and having groups like the ASPCA, the Association of Shelter Veterinarians, is that there's a lot of resource and there's a lot of information already out there that's available for shelters to download and put the work in their own shelters. And the approach that we took in increasing our life-saving capacity here at HSSV weren't concepts that we made up on our own. A lot of the inspiration that we've used were things like the Association of Shelter Veterinarian Guidelines for Animal Care. The ASPCA Pro website has a checklist, and if you haven't had a chance to look at that's another great document to look at. And that's a checklist of the entire guidelines document. And so you can go through do a self-assessment of your shelter and go through and just check off all of the things that you need to get done. And also, I don't have a slide up here, but there's a new initiative out there called the Million Cat Challenge. That's a joint effort between the Correct Shelter Medicine program at UC Davis and the Maddie's Shelter Medicine program at the University of Florida, with the main goal of saving the lives of cats. And so that's another great resource, and it's actually the format that we've been using to address some of the things that we've done here. And so I definitely recommend checking out the Million Cat Challenge. And that's how we're going to outline our case studies. And so the Million Cat Challenge has 5 initiatives for saving cats' lives. And our case studies are pretty cat-centric, and the reason for that is because they are usually the populations that are at most risk. For HSSV, our highest risk population are underage cats, underage kittens, and next to that are community cats. And so those are the 2 areas that we focused mostly on in the past few years in bringing up our life-saving capacity. So our first case study is alternatives to intake. And so the alternatives to intake is providing resources or information to prevent the animals from coming into the shelter in the first place. This is your ideal situation. This is what we want. We want the animals to never come through our doors in the first place. And if we can make that happen, that is the ideal. So the first program that we have that I wanted to talk about is our Pet Pantry program. Our Pet Pantry program is a program that provides food and some limited supplies to the pet owners of Santa Clara County and a few of our verified community cat colony caregivers. And this provides food and supplies on a monthly basis for families who are in need. And these are families that may be struggling, or they might have a rough patch where it comes down to either put food on the table for your kids or give up your animal. And so those are mainly the clients that we help out. And we do have some requirements. We do have in order to be a part of the program, pets must be spayed or neutered, and they must, and while they're on assistance, they're not able to acquire any new pets. And so there we do have a registration process for families wanting to participate in the Pet Pantry program. And this has been a very successful program in preventing pets from coming into the shelter. And in the past year, we've supported about 65 families, between 36 and 38 colonies. And when we've had excess food in our Pet Pantry, we've also distributed some food to 10 different local rescues. As part of this, we do offer assistance for spaying and neutering, because a lot of times if they're coming to the Pet Pantry for support, the requirement of having their pets spayed and neutered might be a barrier to them, and so we do offer support in that area. And so most of the food that we receive through the Pet Pantries are through donations, either private individual donations, corporate donations, and we also have different organizations in our community, such as veterinary clinics, Girl Scouts, etc., who do food drives, pet food drives, and then they donate the food to us. And we also have some arrangements with local stores such as Target and Costco, where we will receive their broken bags and things like that. And so this has been a very successful program for us in keeping pets in their home. The other program that we have to prevent intake is the PUP program, or it's the Preventing Unwanted Pregnancies. And this is geared mainly towards these accidental litters that happen. And we usually find out about this, or the clients come in wanting to surrender their litter of kittens or surrender mom, and that's usually our first point of contact with these folks. And what we offer through the PUP program is that if the owners agree to take the kittens or the puppies, and we've also included some bunnies in this program, if they agree to take the animals home, let the babies stay with mom until they're weaned and until they're old enough to be put up for adoption, we will provide the medical care. We will provide the surgeries for the kittens, and we will, once they're of age, we will also put them through our adoption program. And in exchange for that, we will spay mom for free. And if dad is involved in the home, we will also neuter him. And if feeding the animals is also a barrier, we will sign them up with a pet pantry. And so this has been a great program for us, and we usually have roughly 40-ish litters of puppies and kittens that go through this program every year. And so this has been very successful in preventing these babies, because these babies are going to come through our doors anyway, but by keeping them in their home with their mom, they have a better chance of making it to adoption. And if we can get mom spayed, that stops the issue right there, and there's no more litters from them. The other programs that we have, and this is the next initiative that the Million Cat Challenge has, is managed admission. And what managed admission is exactly that. You're managing all the animals that come through your door. You're managing the populations that you have control over. So since we do have a animal control contract with the city of Sunnyvale, we don't have a lot of control over the strays that come in. However, we do have control over the two other intake types. One is owner surrenders, and the other is transfers. So I'm going to talk about a little bit about how we manage those two in the next few slides. So the first one is for our owner surrenders. In the past year or so, and probably going on 2 years now, we created a pre-intake process. And what this means is none of our owner surrenders come through our doors unannounced. Every owner surrenders that come through our doors are on an appointment basis. And we don't usually turn them away, but we do start a conversation with them. So on the initial contact with the client, we start a conversation. We find out what is going on, why are they wanting to relinquish their animals, and we find out, are there opportunities for us to divert this intake? Are there resources that we can provide so that they're able to keep the animals in the home? And if we, again, our goal is to never have the animals come through our doors. And so if this is an important part of our processes, this pre-intake process, this conversation, and really talking to them. If it's a behavior issue, we can provide behavior resources, perhaps, sign them up with a training class or whatever. But once it's determined that, yes, the animal does need to be relinquished, then the next step in the pre-intake process is setting up an appointment, and the animal then goes home. So at this appointment, the animal comes back, they get a health assessment, they get a behavior assessment, and their medical records are also assessed. And if they need vaccines or if they need FELV, FIV testing, that's done at that appointment. There are behavior assessments done as well, so that we know, we have a pretty good idea of what types of resources we might need for the behavior team. If it's an older animal, we will draw some blood for our routine blood work, and if they need a spay and neuter or dental cleaning or any other medical workup, we will then make that appointment. So the animal goes home after this pre-intake exam, and then once there's a space available on our adoption floor or during their scheduled spay and neuter appointment, they come in, and that is the point of their intake. So right here, we've eliminated a good possibly up to a week of time where had we taken that animal in when the owner requested the surrender, we would have spent that extra 5 days or so. And depending on the time of year, the wait for the intake for an owner surrender may be anywhere from a few days up to perhaps 3 weeks during the middle of kitten season. And the way that it's determined whether or not we are able to take the animal in is our resource level in our shelter. And I'm going to talk a little bit about our determining what our resource levels are in a few slides, so bear with me. So that's worked really, really well. And our best cases that we've had using this pre-intake process is that we have cats who need to be relinquished, and they've gone through the entire process, and they've gone home spayed and neutered and vaccinated and everything, and they're waiting for their time on the adoption floor. And they come in, they're put in the adoption floor, 2 hours later they're adopted. So you have this cat that has come in with a length of stay of half a day, and that is fantastic. And if you can do that for the majority of your owner surrenders, that's that many days of or animal care days that you are saving that you can then reallocate to other needs in the shelter. So the other managed admission addresses our transfer process. And so we have an intake team. We just recently created a whole new intake department that handles both this owner surrenders and the transfers. And the way that we determine intake is never a unilateral decision, with the burden being on one individual. It's usually a group effort, and it's a committee, and we call it our rounds committee, which meets at least 2 times a week. And it's comprised of the decision makers of the different operations departments. And so we have supervisors, managers, and the director who participate in these rounds discussion twice a week to determine where we are resource-wise. And we also have an animal transport coordinator who is responsible for actually going out to our transfer partners who also participates, and so that she knows what our resource levels are at any given time, and so she can appropriately pick out which animals can come in through our doors. And so the reason that we use this process is because, for one, when you're making decisions based on emotions and based on other things, that's not the most efficient use of your time. And having these discussions allow us to make objective decisions on how we're managing our transfer intake, and it's also, and that also decreases or pretty much eliminates any bottlenecks that might occur if we don't go through this process, because we don't want to have too many animals being transferred over that need multiple extractions and dentals, and we don't want to overload our adoption center with, too many pit bulls or too many chihuahuas. And so by having these discussions, we can have a holistic view of what's going on operationally so that we can make educated decisions on what animals that are appropriate for transfer. And one of the great things about having this process and being able to utilize this process, and one of the really cool things is that we've actually we've gotten to the point where we've been able to increase our intake. And so for a lot of shelters, the ultimate goal is to increase your efficiency, decrease your intake. But our position in our community as a safety net for animals, not just in our shelter, but also in our partner shelters, is by us becoming more efficient and decreasing the length of stay and optimizing that, we've freed up animal care days and more resources than to go to our partner shelters and increase the number of animals that we've intaked. And so just a few little changes and just looking at those few days of savings in length of stay has given us the ability to increase our transfer rate. In 2013, we transferred 344 cats from other shelters, and in 2014, we've been able to increase that 65%. And I don't have the numbers posted up here, but I just looked at our 2015 numbers for the total number of cats transferred from other shelters, and we're up to over 1,000 cats, mostly kittens, that we've been able to transfer in because of the changes that we've made internally. And so our final intake for the year will be well above 6,000 animals, and it's just increasing, and we're not seeing a decrease anytime soon. So that's really, really fantastic. So the last initiative that we're going to talk about is capacity for care. And capacity for care is matching up the number of animals that you have in your shelter with the resource level of the shelter and being able to provide the highest quality of care. And so the 5 freedoms of animal welfare comes from way back when, agricultural animals, and it's the promise that we make to animals when they're in the shelter to make sure that they're well fed, that they're comfortable, their injuries are addressed, and we prevent diseases from occurring, and we keep them healthy holistically. But we've also taken it a step further and added a 6th freedom, and that's a freedom from euthanasia, and this is euthanasia's, unnecessary euthanasia. So every healthy animal that comes through our doors are put up for adoption. Animals that we can treat, we treat, and for the ones that we cannot treat, we do euthanize animals. So we're not we do euthanize. We do not euthanize for time or space, but we do euthanize if it's necessary. If it's if there's a medical issue that we cannot address, or if there's a behavior issue that's a danger to our community, we will make euthanasia decisions. So capacity for care, there's a lot of factors that play into it, and by increasing your capacity for care, that increases your life-saving abilities, and that increases the number of animals that you're able to bring through your doors. And ways that affect the capacity for care are things like increasing your facility capacity. So that means like building a new shelter or building more cage space. But with that, you get more costs associated with that. You need to hire more staff and all those other things. And so it's not necessarily the most efficient way of increasing your capacity for care. The other thing that you can do is reducing your intake. By reducing your intake, that allows your shelter to focus more on the animals that are there. And so for some shelters, reducing your intake is the appropriate way to increase your capacity for care. And the easiest way to increase the capacity for care without having to affect things operationally is minimizing the length of stay or optimizing your length of stay. That is one area that seems like little changes that will have a significant effect on your capacity for care. So some of the things that we've done internally at HSSE to address capacity for care, and when we started thinking about this and started thinking about housing, we had some requirements and some things that we were very committed to that were priority for us. So doing anything with housing, we want to make sure that there is adequate space for the length of stay the anticipated length of stay. And so most of the time that our animals are spending is in our adoption floors. And so those spaces are going to look very different than short-term holding. For example, animals that come in for surgeries, they're only going to be there for a day. It's acceptable to put them in a stainless steel box or stainless steel cage, but that is very different from a cat that is not the most adoptable, that might be hanging out with us for 2 or 3 weeks. So that was a commitment that we would make. We also committed that every animal would have access to cat beds and given a choice in space, and that they would have the appropriate enrichment, socialization, and the separation of food and water from their litter box. So this is photos of our adoption floor, and this is, they have multiple cat trees, so they have a choice of where they want to be. They have access to natural light. So the first thing that we did, looking at housing, was addressing that last bullet point of separation of food and water from their litter box. And in the back of the house, so our holding areas, we do have stainless steel cages, and so we made the commitment that we would provide more space for all of our cats. And so there were 100 or so individual cages that over the course of a year we cut holes into it. And so if you're familiar with the UC Davis Shelter Medicine Program, you're probably aware of the portal cutting. And if you're not aware of it, there's a great resource there on the website that has very detailed information on how to go about cutting holes in stainless steel cages. We purchased a plasma cutter to do this, and we enlisted the help of both staff and volunteers. Our volunteers were very, very invaluable in this process of cutting the holes and fashioning the PVC portals. And this was difficult because what we've done is essentially cut in half the functional space of our housing. And this was a really, really hard sell for a lot of staff in our organization. The common thinking is the more animals you can stuff into your shelter, the more lives you can save, which is absolutely wrong. But that is the thinking, and trying to convince people that no, if you cut holes in the cages, and although you decrease your functional space, you're providing a healthier space, you're providing more space for the cats, that they'll remain healthier, you're going to be able to save more lives. And that was a really difficult concept for staff to grasp. And so it took a leap of faith on their part to trust that this is really what's going to happen. And I am very pleased to say after the year of cutting holes in cages, we have increased our save rate. And so that's been a fantastic project that we went through. And the other thing with the housing that we committed to was the availability of beds for our cats. And what we did was create or make these PVC beds for our cats. And again, on the UC Davis website, there are plans and for how to make that, and that's pretty detailed. And for this, we enlisted the help of our summer camp kids to put these together, and that was a great project for our summer camp kids. We have different age levels putting together different components of the cat beds, and so we had the littlest kids putting together the PVC pipes and elbows, sort of like Tinker Toys, and then we had the older kids cutting out the pattern of the vinyl sheets and then cementing them together. And these beds are great because they're completely disinfectable. You can cut them at different heights to accommodate pretty much any cage size or anything like that. So that's capacity for care in housing. And so the other thing with capacity for care, getting back to our population that was most at risk, is our kittens. So we do have a kitten nursery. When this building was built, there was a doggy daycare / boarding facility that was built into the facility. That ended up not working too well for the organization, and so it was converted into a kitten nursery. We turned the overnight boarding rooms into mommy and me wards, which are apartment-size walk-in suites for cats, for queens and their nursing babies. And so what this has done is allowed us to transfer moms with babies from other shelters into our kitten nursery. We also have several other rooms that we've designated for different age groups, different risk levels, or different sources of kittens coming in from strays or transfers, et cetera. And we have the ability to keep them separated. Our goal is always to keep the kittens in foster home, and so that is most of the kittens don't stay in the kitten nursery very long, but it's a nice overflow area for kittens to stay temporarily until they can go to their foster home or when they're coming back. So this has most of the transfers that we are bringing from other shelters are underage kittens, and the last count that we had for this past kitten season is that we've been able to put through about 2,000 kittens through our kitten nursery, and these are kittens that come in as strays or surrenders and transfers from other shelters. We also have a bottle baby program, and we have very dedicated fosters who will take these underage, unweaned kittens home. And most of these guys are healthy. They just need a safe and warm place to grow up a little bit. And this has been a very successful program. Most of the kittens that go through our kitten nursery are underage, and so this has increased our save rate and increased our life-saving capacity for underage kittens tremendously by having a kitten nursery and also a bottle baby foster program. The last capacity for care program that we implemented that I wanted to talk about is our community cat garden. And this is a garden that is off of our the president's office and our boardroom. That's just an open garden space that one day during a manager's meeting, we were just sitting around talking about community cats and what we can do. At that time, several years ago, the city of Sunnyvale did not allow TNR. They have since changed their policies, but at that time, they did not allow TNR, which meant any feral cat that came through our doors, if we could not find another rescue or another organization to rehome them, would have to be euthanized. And talking with during a manager's meeting, we were talking about, well, what can we do and what can we do to address this population? And someone chimed in, wouldn't it be cool if we could just hold on to these cats and put them up for adoption ourselves? And from that idea, this community cat garden project came about. And so we started the pilot project in the fall of 2013 and created a safe outdoor space for cats. And so we started with some strays, and it was a pilot program. So we put together some criteria for cats that could go into the garden, and they needed to be vaccinated, spayed and neutered, microchipped, and tested. And so they needed to be FLV and FIV tested. And then they were put through our working cat / garden cat adoption program. And those are geared towards vineyards or gardens or barns or nurseries or anywhere that wanted outdoor cat. And we took it a step further to provide post-adoption care support. And so what that came with the adoption of a community cat out of our garden was that we did lend out extra large Great Dane size crate to help us transition, and we do have some education on how to make that transition from our facility to their new homes. And there's a lot of post-adoption support that goes along with that, and I think that's a difference that sets us apart, where we will loan out these cages and we will provide that post-adoption support. And this has been a very successful pilot program for us. Since this program started towards the end of 2013, we've been able to adopt out more than 60 cats through this. We weren't expecting to get a lot of adoptions out of this, but it has grown. We're currently undergoing some renovations in our community cat garden, so we haven't had as many adoptions lately, but this has been a very, very cool project for us. We've learned a lot from it, and we've also started, and we've gone through several programmatic refinements and things like that, and we started clicker training the cats, and the cats are very aware of who their feeders are, and so we have a scheduled feedings, and specific people feed these guys, and a lot of them have actually become very tame, and actually coming into wanting to come inside, and some of these outdoor community cats have actually gone up for adoption through our normal adoption program, because they've just sort of tamed themselves, and they may have been tame cats previous to coming into our shelter, but this has been very, very fascinating to witness, and so we're very excited about this program, and hoping to have this program grow. So what does all this mean? Some of the results that have come about these changes, and these aren't very many changes that we've made in the past few years, but we have seen a decrease in the length of stay. So between 2013 and 2014, we've seen on average almost a 12% decrease in the length of stay for both cats and kittens combined. From 2014 to 2015, it's about the same, only because we have increased our intake, and we've increased the number of animals that we've been able to care for that need extended care. So that sort of skews the length of stay. Our hospitalization for URI as a result of cutting holes in cages has dropped tremendously. We've gone down in the number of hospitalized cases, excuse me, and that's only have improved for us. And so we're at the point now where we're actually transferring in cats with URI to be treated here at our facility. Excuse me. And we've also seen an increase in the live release rate for our cats. I apologize, excuse me.
Sure, it's no problem. We are getting close to the end of our presentation.
I'm going to jump in here while
okay,
Dr.
Carol,
Kamiya
go ahead.
gets her voice back.
Yes.
So I think that, as Dr. Kamiya has highlighted, lots of change has gone on with this effort, and the results have demonstrated that the change has been worth it. That being said, change is very hard. And so some of the things that are really important, this actually gets back to when I was talking earlier about our strategic priorities. One of the ones we had there was really about exploring things and doing things in a way that you start small and you gain some momentum. And I think that's really important, because you really want to be getting buy-in and get people on board with it as a group effort, as opposed to something that's getting dictated and handed down. And so by starting small and not having people get too hung up on stats or numbers, people can start to see the change. And then as you start to measure and see the improvement, people are then more engaged with willing to scale it further. So that's really important. And again, you really want to get everybody on the same page, the direction you want to go, and being able to show how it fits into what we're trying to accomplish in the organization overall. And, in terms of leadership in the organization, it's really important that people feel like they can take risks and they don't need to get it right the first time or even the second time, and that we really think and focus on what is it that we're learning, and we take those learnings and we iterate to the next new idea. And that has really, I think, made a big difference in terms of people being able to embrace change and try to do things differently, which has resulted in some really nice results for the number of animals that we've been able to save. So I think we are at the end of this section.
And we do have a lot of questions that have come in from the audience. So let's do a little Q&A.
Okay, let's do that. Sounds great.
All right. So here's the first question. Are you saying managed admission lets you help other local shelters more rather than pushing your intake onto them?
Yes, we absolutely. With the managed admission, we're not turning animals away. What we're doing is we are intaking them. The intake is dependent on the resources that we have in our shelter at that particular time. And so it's a very objective process that lets us bring the animals in most efficiently and with the least amount of length of stay as possible. So what that managed admission allows us to do is to manage length of stay. And by managing length of stay, we decrease, or we've eliminated all of the non-productive time that the animal is spending in our shelter, and that frees up more space and more resources to transfer more animals through our doors.
Okay, thank you.
So
go ahead, Carol.
Yeah, I was just going to hop in and say, this is highly dependent on our particular business model, which is, unlike a municipal shelter, which the strays are going to come in at the rate the strays come in, because we have a mix of animals that are coming in. About a third of our intake is strays that we house from the city of Sunnyvale, but then the other 2/3 is half from doing rescue from other shelters, and then the owner surrender program. So, every organization kind of needs to take into account, how they're structured and their ability to implement these kinds of things. But if you do have some flexibility in terms of doing rescue work or doing owner surrender programs, you do have the opportunity to orchestrate that a little bit more, that makes it possible to actually optimize your resources and ultimately move more animals through the system. And I think the other thing is that in terms of the owner surrender program, we've actually found that people actually have a fair amount of flexibility in terms of when they can bring an animal into you. I came in from outside of the animal rescue organization field, and I thought, it was like, oh my God, people would have to surrender on the spot, and they actually very frequently do not. Sometimes they do, and we'll accommodate that, but a lot of times there's a lot of flexibility about when they actually, could relinquish the animal. That gives us more time to work things out in terms of how we're handling the capacity.
So this next question goes along with the managed intake, and this is a common question that comes up. Do you find a lot of angry citizens and or dumped animals?
No, we don't. We do not. And the entire intake process is a conversation with the client. And so from the very beginning, we're trying to build a relationship with them and trying to really get an understanding of what the situation is that's causing the animal to be relinquished. And from there, we're trying to make the best decision as possible on how we're going to intake. And like Carol said, if it's an emergency situation or if we feel the animal might be in danger, we will definitely take them in on the spot. But by having the majority of the animals put on the waiting list and managed and not taken in right away, we do have that flexibility to take those emergencies in when they happen. But we haven't had an issue with people going away very angry or dumping animals.
That's great. Here's the next one. We do managed emissions, but we find that when we limit intake from animal control, then they get overwhelmed and just euthanize on their end. Is there a good solution to this?
We haven't experienced that situation. We've actually increased our intake from animal control by doing the managed admission, and so I'm not exactly sure what the relationship is or what the dynamics are of the shelter, but there is the possibility of working with them. We have our animal transfer coordinator going to our municipal shelter, to the city shelter, at least 2 or 3 times a week, transferring animals over to us. And so I think there's a lot more information that's needed, but I do believe that there can be a good solution. We just don't have the ability right now to address that. I'm very happy to talk further with whoever sent that question in to talk about it offline.
Well, one of the things that jumps out at me is that, and this gets back to an earlier slide, which is you really need to be focusing on length of stay, because length of stay is moving the animals through the shelter faster. So when you talk about, quote, limiting intake at any particular point in time, it actually is, if that's coupled with reduced length of stay, you're actually in total putting more animals through the shelter over time. But if you're just limiting intake and you're not focusing on length of stay, then you are going to, I think, end up with a bottleneck situation, which sounds like is being described here. But again, Dr. Kamiya would be happy to spend some more time offline with someone on that topic.
Great, thank you. Here's another one. Who is performing the intake health assessment? Do you have care staff or veterinarians providing this service?
So we do, our initial intake exams are performed by our RVT staff. So we have a mixture of registered veterinary technicians and veterinary assistants who assist with the initial health assessment. And they're doing the first overview of the animal, and they're identifying any abnormalities, and they're also administering vaccines and the dewormer. And if there are any abnormalities identified, then the veterinarians will look at it. Every animal is looked at prior to spay and neuter surgery, but for that initial intake assessment, the veterinary technician staff are the ones that are doing that.
Okay. I have a really hard one for you, so put your thinking cap on. Our organization is completely unorganized. We have no structure, no goals, no capacity to provide shelter medicine in any systemic way. Where should we start?
So I think one of the most important things is actually to get a handle on what the size of the problem is in the community. And so that would be my suggestion in terms of the first place to start, is to get, if possible, an understanding of, how many animals are there within the community, how many organizations are involved in housing and caring for those animals, and what are the populations of animals that are involved. Because essentially you kind of need a lay of the land to figure out how to move forward. To the extent that you can put get that understanding in place, then that can help you prioritize where you might want to start with some things. So for example, and I'll talk a little bit about this in the last section, one of the reasons why we prioritized kittens is because they were the single largest at-risk population of animals in the community, and also were a population that basically could have kind of a similar process for all of the animals that came through. So if you get that kind of baseline understanding, it can help you start to prioritize how to tackle what's going on in terms of the homeless animals in the community. But I'll see what else Dr. Kamiya wants to add into the mix there.
No, I think that's a really good place to start to figure out where to start. There are also consulting services, and for a lot of shelters, that might be a little bit difficult to perform that self-assessment, and there are resources out there, and there are the universities have consulting services. There are other organizations that have shelter consultation services, and there's also private consultants who can come in to help with the initial shelter assessment. And for a lot of shelters, that there's a lot of value in having someone from the outside coming in to help with that assessment.
Thank you both. I think we should move on now. I know there's one last section before we get to the end of our presentation tonight, and maybe we'll have time at the very end for a few more questions.
Terrific, yeah. So I'm going to talk about just the organization committing to shelter medicine and kind of what that takes. Before we do that, though, we've got one more poll question. Actually, I think we have two more poll questions, but we've got one at this moment.
We have a question for you. Everybody wake up out in the audience land. Answer on your screen. Which of the following ways does your organization include veterinarians in the overall running of operations? Policy creation, defining processes and procedures, staff training, managerial manager responsibilities, or none. I had a hard time with that word. So which of the following ways does your organization include veterinarians in the overall running of operations at your shelter? I'll give you a few seconds here to answer. And this will be an interesting results. Oh, what do you think of that, Carol?
Yeah, it is interesting. One of I think the biggest transitions that we did make was around managerial responsibilities, so that all of these things could actually start to get integrated. Certainly policy creation is a start. Really happy to see that kind of defining processes and procedures piece, because that makes a big difference. But if you do have shelter medicine staff that have managerial capabilities, that's a great way to kind of get the ball rolling very quickly. At the same time, if you don't have people that have that skill set as well, getting them involved in processes and procedures is a great place to get going. So I want to talk a little bit about transitioning into shelter medicine, specifically how HSSV approached it. And, first and foremost, I think there does need to be a commitment at the top of the organization to shelter medicine. Otherwise, it can get extremely frustrating for people that want to implement shelter medicine in the organization if there isn't buy-in at the leadership team level. And so, a great example, Dr. Kamiya was talking earlier about changing the housing for cats. And when she brought this to me the first time and she explained it to me, I had the question. I was like, well, if we're having the number of cages, we now have half the number of cages. How's that going to work? And she explained it to me. I'm like, okay, I got it. That makes sense to me. And gave her the freedom to go ahead and move forward with that implementation. And then when the noise started happening in the organization about, oh my God, we can't do this, and volunteers and staff were getting excited about it, I was able to back up her decision to move forward with that. And, had she not had that kind of buy-in and commitment, it would have made it very hard for the rest of the organization to move forward and kind of, jump into the mix. So that's a huge piece. Where we started, actually, Dr. Kamiya mentioned earlier about having an outside consultant come in, and that's actually what we did. We were kind of struggling internally with increasing our capacity to save lives. And we actually had a veterinarian at the time that actually had been trained in kind of managing labs for animals, which is, a very different kind of environment than a shelter environment. So by having somebody come in and do an initial assessment around shelter medicine, it helped us understand kind of where our current level of performance was and what it might look like for us to get to a higher level. And then through that process, we made a decision that we wanted to bring in someone that had expertise in shelter medicine to actually, kind of change up how we did operations. And that's when Dr. Kamiya was brought on board, I think about 3 years ago. So that was an incredibly important piece. The next thing was really looking at the needs and the costs associated with animals that are most at risk, and I'll go into a little bit more depth there in a minute. And then also looking at how to invest in veterinarians' continued education. We actually found in many cases it's less expensive to invest in their education for the value that they'll bring into the organization than it is to have certain things handled outside of the organization. And then there's a lot of resources that are available by reaching out to community vets and to veterinary schools. So as I mentioned around committing to shelter medicine at the leadership level, you really want to understand the leadership capabilities you've got in the organization to begin with, and the veterinary background and the willingness of those vets to adapt. And if you don't have that, then you really kind of really need to assess if you've got the right team of people in place that can move ahead. What was really exciting about Dr. Kamiya coming on board is that the vets at HSSV were very anxious to learn and very willing to change and wanted to save more lives and really wanted to embrace new ways of doing things. Another aspect is, making sure to educate, key stakeholders on what the value of shelter medicine is and how it links to results and output. That's really critical in terms of getting people on board with that. And again, we're not, for example, decreasing the number of cages. We're actually increasing the ability to handle more animals, and helping people make that connection to understand it is really critical. And again, the consults are, I think, hugely beneficial, and that's really how we got started in terms of putting our toe in the water, understanding what the opportunities were, and then moving forward with that. In the context of understanding the size of the population, one of the things that we did was look at the animals in community in total. I mentioned that a little bit briefly. When we started the coalition in the community with the other shelters back in 2006, we used kind of Maddie's approach of developing a pet evaluation matrix, and we went out and asked the community and the general public and veterinarians and people in shelters how they define various conditions in terms of animals being defined as healthy or needing to be rehabilitated or needing ongoing treatment. That gave us a common language as a community to prioritize animals in terms of how they needed to be treated and handled. And we broke that down into both medical conditions and behavioral conditions as they related to these different categories. And so this is how we actually determined that we wanted to put emphasis on kittens. So you'll see in the upper left-hand corner, treatable cats that could be rehabilitated became our priority, and essentially those are mostly kittens. So we said there's a lot of them, but if we can actually figure out a process and a plan around that, the resolution isn't actually all that difficult versus something like a cat with a behavioral issue that could potentially be rehabilitated, but it might really take a lot of time to do that. There may be a lot fewer of them, but they're a lot more difficult in terms of that resolution, either in terms of the amount of time or the resources that are needed. So that helped prioritize how we would go about implementing shelter medicine so that we could be most effective and efficient as quickly as possible. I feel like I might have skipped a slide here.
Nope, that's it. But these resources are also on our website, and they're also in your resource widget at the bottom of your screen.
Yeah, so I did just want to, I'm just going to hop back briefly to this other slide just to talk to a little bit, again, very quickly because I know we're almost out of time, about investing in veterinarians' continued education. We had a great example of we were sending animals that needed orthopedic surgery to specialists in the community, and by just investing in some education and in some surgical tools for one of our vets, for basically the cost of one surgery that we would have to pay to a community vet, we took that money and we invested it again in a course and in some tools, and now that vet is actually able to do those surgeries in-house and we don't have to send them out. So we're seeing a lot of payback by looking at opportunities to do things like that. And then also reaching out to, community veterinarians. Some may donate their time, some may give you, discounts for shelter animals. And then creating relationships with veterinary schools in the community is great. We now have a local community college where part of their curriculum, their RVT students, their registered vet tech students, are coming here as part of doing an internship and getting hands-on experience. So there's opportunity to do things there. So that actually, I think, gets us back to the resource slide. So there's just some places that people can reference some of the things that we've been talking about this evening. And I think we have one last poll question.
One last poll question, yes. After this webinar, do you intend to further pursue implementing shelter medicine in your organization? Yes, no, or undecided? I think after these great speakers that we had tonight, I would probably vote yes. So please vote on your screen, please. After this webinar, do you intend to further pursue implementing shelter medicine in your organization? Wow, I'm blown away. Look at that.
Well, that's
Carol,
exciting.
Dr. Kamiya.
That's exciting.
Yes.
Well, having been through the journey, we highly recommend it, and certainly happy to chat with folks in an offline scenario if that's helpful. So you can feel free to reach out to me or Dr. Kamiya. Also, if you want to check out our website, you can just learn more about us there as well.
Well, thank you both very much. I think we're out of time and we can't take any more questions this evening, but we will put together a Q&A document for the questions that were not answered tonight. And I have to thank the audience for submitting such really good questions to our speakers.
Terrific. Well, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. And Dr. Kamiya,
thank you. Thank you very much.
Okay, great. So that's the end of our event. We want to thank Carol and Dr. Kamiya and all of you for your time tonight. We invite you to take a few minutes to complete our survey. Your feedback is important to us. Click on the link on your screen. If for some reason you can't see that link, it is also in the resource file at the bottom of your screen. And the link will be mailed to you in a few days. This webcast will be available on demand shortly, and we hope you will share this presentation on your social sites. Please take advantage of our free on-demand webcasts available on our website at maddiesinstitute.org, and plan to join us on January 14th for our next webcast, How Stress is Sabotaging Your Dog Adoption Efforts, with Dr. Sheila Darpino. Join us and learn to recognize the harmful effects of stress on shelter dogs and the strategies to alleviate that stress. So thanks again for being here with us this evening, and good night.